In an interview before the DLC came out, Hidetaka Miyazaki did confirm that it was Miquella in the announcement image. But I have seen some people dismiss it as just concept art. Is there anything in the game that actually connects Miquella with Torrent? In typical FromSoft fashion, the answers are there, but you have to do quite a bit of digging. And this also gives us some hints about the nature of spirit calling, as well as the horn scent and the Ancestral Followers. Now in the base game, Melina gives us the Spectral Steed whistle, which is a delicate goldwork ring, and Miquella is well known for being a master craftsman of golden items, like the prosthetic limbs for Melina or the unalloyed golden needle. And thanks to Shadow of the Erdtree, we get even more evidence. In the DLC, Torrent is referenced by name as Torrent in just one item, the Spirit Raisin. This lets Torrent push back enemies. According to its description, Spirit Raisins are bitter medicine traditionally claimed to enhance one's spirituality, but Torrent seems to have a taste for it. Now, to make the Spirit Raisin, you need a specific Forger Brewed cookbook, which you get from Moore after saving a Kindred of Rot, and the only other recipe in that cookbook is a recipe to make Charming Branches, which are an upgraded version of the Bewitching Branches. So to recap, the cookbook that lets you create an item clearly associated with Miquella also lets you create the only item that refers to Torrent by his name. What's more, the recipe for the Charming Branches requires a beast horn. This item tells us that the Crucible has a particularly strong influence on the beasts of the Realm of Shadow, causing many to grow horns despite the characteristics of their species. And we see this in the Specimen Storehouse, where we come across massive horned steeds that are most likely of the same species as Torrent. To me, the description for the beast horn explains how Torrent and the other steeds we can encounter in the Specimen Storehouse got their horns. They lived in the Land of Shadow and came under the influence of the Crucible. Since Torrent is smaller and has fewer horns, I think this means that Torrent is an adolescent spectral steed. That could also work with Miquella being cursed with eternal childhood. Torrent could also be an eternally young horse. And we do know that Miquella visited the Specimen Storehouse since there is a Miquella's Cross there. The Miquella's Crosses are also very important to understand Torrent, as the best NPC in the DLC tells us,
they are akin to tender Miquella's footprints, or gravestones, which mark what he's left behind.
And according to the Spirit Gravestone, the oldest gravestones turn into spirits and then fade away. We also have the larval tear from the Land of Shadow, which is an exceptionally rare creature that burgeons from spirit graves and lives only a fleeting existence. Neither flesh nor spirit, but something in between. I think neither flesh nor spirit, but something in between also applies to Torrent. He is a spectral steed, but he can also consume fruit and get healed by the Flask of Crimson Tears. And the notion of spirits being a physical object that has faded away could also apply to Torrent. He was once a fully physical steed, but over time, he turned into a spirit. Just to clarify, in the DLC, Torrent is otherwise referred to as Spectral Steed. I had been toying with the idea that Miquella was on top of some other generic Spectral Steed, but since the Spirit Raisin specifically calls out Torrent, I think this is supposed to be his horse. There's also a very critical component that connects Torrent with spirit calling. In the base game, after we get the whistle for Torrent, we can also pick up the spirit calling bell from Ranni, who's disguised herself as Renna. As Ranni tells us,
"'Tis a bell for calling forth spirits. Summon them with it. From ash and return to the Erdtree. The spirits will obey thine command but briefly, as they recall battles past."
So whoever had the spirit calling bell was also in close contact with Miquella, Torrent's master. In a previous video, I did think that Renna was the creator of the spirit calling bell. Torrent prefers the frozen raisins, which are grown in the north, and have a lot of deep connections with spirit calling and the occult. And for what it's worth, Miquella, when we finally see him, has 4 arms, just like the Renna puppet that Ranni has. So I definitely think there's some type of connection there. But based on what we have in the DLC, I think Miquella also invented the spirit calling bell as well. In the Land of Shadow, the revered Spirit Ash strengthens not only your Spirit Ashes, but also Torrent. Now, most of these Spirit Ashes come from the tutelary deities, or those pot-killing lads you can find throughout the Land of Shadow. However, you can also pick up Spirit Ash on top of the Torrent-like horses in the Specimen Storehouse, and I think this further deepens the connection between Torrent and spirit calling. To be clear, Miquella did not invent the practice of summoning spirits. Summoning goes all the way back to the Tibia Mariners, who are described as the oldest of the Gravekeepers. Instead, I think Miquella iterated on and combined earlier types of summoning to create the spirit calling bell. We have the Spirit Ash from the tutelary deities. We also have the Wraith calling bells that can be found throughout Leonia. I will also point out that you can only summon spirits when you're next to a rebirth monument, and Miquella is linked with the nascent butterfly. We also have Commander O'Neill and Commander Nile, who fought for Miquella and can summon spirits as well. And from a mechanical standpoint, Miquella is running a charisma build in a Souls game, so he really needs to rely on summons. So if we accept the idea that Miquella was Torrent's former master and created the spirit calling bell, how did Melina and Ranni get their hands on those items? Like Miquella, Ranni is an Empyrean who divested herself of her flesh, so I wonder if Ranni also has the ability to show up in the Land of Shadow. And according to Roger,
Ranni's whereabouts since the shattering are a well-kept secret. She hasn't been seen even once.
We also know that there are Corians in the Land of Shadow with R'hllana and Count Emhyr, so it's possible Ranni has just been laying low in the Land of Shadow since the shattering. Maybe she just wanted to spend some time with her aunt. In addition, Melina, as well as Torrent, are all bodiless, and they appear as spirits, so I wonder if this lets them cross into the Land of Shadow without having to undergo some insane ritual that Miquella did. And for what it's worth, we don't really have a firm grasp of when Torrent came into existence, but personally I'm leaning more towards Miquella creating Torrent while he's in the Land of Shadow, and then he was able to pass on the whistle and the spirit calling bell. Although it is also possible that he created this much earlier before the lands were even split off. But again, that is speculation. Meanwhile, we also know that Torrent can be killed by the Flame of Frenzy. According to the item Surging Frenzied Flame, spirits are eternal, and yet Frenzied Flame melts them away regardless. This explains why we can't summon Torrent in the Abyssal Woods. He could actually die there, and this was hinted at in the base game. If you choose the Flame of Frenzy ending and Melina is still alive, you can actually hear Torrent whimpering. But that does raise a question. If the Frenzied Flame can kill Torrent, why doesn't Torrent leave with Melina after we get embraced by the Three Fingers? Is he stupid? Now, I am fully aware that this is most likely a gameplay concession. Taking away Torrent from players who went with the Flame of Frenzy would be way too punishing, even for FromSoft. But there is a valid lore reason for why Torrent didn't leave with Melina as well. Since Miquella was Torrent's former master, it's quite likely that Torrent knew about Miquella's unalloyed golden needle, which can remove the frenzied flame. And unlike Melina, who doubted our ability to become the Elden Lord, Torrent had our measure from the start.
I've been testing you to see whether or not grace truly does guide you, and whether you are fit to face the challenge that entails. It seems my worries were unfounded. Torrent had your measure from the very start, whereas I merely pretended.
So I could also see Torrent being more trusting of us than Melina. Before I wrap up, I also want to discuss the potential relationship between Torrent and the ancestral spirits. As both Mad Luigi and Miss Chalice pointed out, Torrent bears a striking resemblance to the ancestral spirits. Both have a similar sound and particle effects when jumping, and both can do at least a double jump. And in the game, there's quite a bit that links Miquella to the Ancestral Followers. One of the places where you can find the Ancestral Followers is the Consecrated Snowfields, which is a pilgrimage route to Miquella's Erdtree. And as Quaylac pointed out, you need nascent butterflies to make the dappled cured meats, which have the same coloring as the immunizing horn charms. So I wonder if Miquella was studying the Ancestral Followers and learned about the power of horns before he was actually able to enter the Land of Shadow. And as we learn from the horn charms, the Ancestral Followers believe that the horns of a long-lived beast continue to bud like antlers, over and over again until the beast one day becomes an ancestral spirit. However, the +3 versions give us new lore about the horn scent. Horns are sublime artifacts to horn scent, and their presence confirms the belief that they are a chosen people. Only the repeated sprouting of fresh horns can create a tangled horn, which is viewed as an irrefutable symbol of primacy. But as Hawkshaw pointed out, the Ancestral Followers don't actually grow horns, they wear them. I think the Ancestral Followers are no longer a chosen people because they are no longer under the influence of the Crucible, thanks to America. And they're much more recent. Unlike the horn scent, there's no written lore in the game that even suggests that they predate the Erdtree. We also know that the Ancestral Followers eschew letters and metalworking. Meanwhile, the horn scent had a much more technologically advanced civilization. They also valued metals like silver and gold, as seen by the horn tender items. Basically, the Ancestral Followers are like tradlorpers or primitivists. They think they're valuing tradition, but in actuality, their form of tradition is really just a response to modernity, aka America and her Golden Order. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what Yens think.